We're continuing on, y'all, with the chapters 22 through 24 with the Israelites wanting to hear from God until he actually came close. And in chapter 22 and 24, it shows how thousands of people was at the bottom of the mountain, and not everyone was allowed to go up to the same level. Most of them stayed at the bottom, the Israelites. Some went part of the way. You had the 70 priests who got closer. You got Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu who went higher, and then Joshua, and then Moses at the top into the clouds talking with God. And some people may ask, why is that? And it's because closeness with God isn't just about desire. It's not. It also requires obedience, surrender, trust, and responsibility. It's kind of similar to climbing a mountain in real life. The higher you go, the thinner the air becomes and the more pressure you feel. Not everyone is prepared to have a higher elevation. Some people say they want deeper levels with God, but they don't realize deeper levels also require greater obedience, greater consecration, and greater trust. Everybody wanted the presence of God. Everybody. But not everybody was willing to continue higher into what came with it. And when we start moving into chapter 22, it focus heavily on responsibility, justice, accountability, mercy, and integrity. Moving along, one important thing this chapter revealed is that the people of God were accountable not only for, like, how can I say this, intentional wrongdoing, but sometimes even for harm done without malicious intent, if that makes sense. God was teaching Israel to take responsibility seriously. Now, when someone harmed their neighbor or caused some type of damage or loss, they were expected to make it right. That principle still matters today, but people don't act like it. A lot of people only apologize or correct things when they're forced to, exposed, or pressured. But according to the spirit of these laws, God was teaching his people to willingly show fairness, mercy, gentleness, and responsibility, even when they weren't legally forced to. God called the Israelites to honor both him and the people around them by living generously, honestly, and justly. Treat people how you want to be treated. And this chapter also shows how much God cared about protecting vulnerable people. He specifically mentioned widows, orphans, strangers, and the poor. God warns Israel not to oppress them because he hears their cries. Y'all know in the New Testament, he's near to the brokenhearted. Come on now, somebody. That's powerful that he said that because Israel had once been oppressed in Egypt themselves. God didn't want them becoming the same type of people who once mistreated them. But hey, that still applies today as well. Sometimes people go through painful seasons, y'all. They ask God for forgiveness and then turn around and mistreat others they once gained influence, authority, or control over. Just because you get a title does not mean to look down on other people and treat them as scums of the earth. And God was teaching Israel that being delivered shouldn't change the way they treat people. We should remember that today. Now, this chapter, it also talks about lending money and not taking advantage of poor people. God even commands that if someone takes another person's clothing as collateral, it must be returned back to them before sunset. Why? Because that person might need those clothes to go to sleep in. Now, that reveals something important about God's character if you really look at it. Even within, how can I say this? Even within justice, there's still mercy. God also gives strong warning against witchcraft, idolatry, immoral practices, and sacrifices to false gods because Israel, they were surrounded by pagan nations, y'all. And pagans were people who worshipped false gods and followed spiritual systems outside of the worship of one true God, of the true God. Now, God constantly separated Israel from the practices of the pagan world because compromise would eventually pull them away from him. And he knew that. That's still one of the biggest struggles that some of us face today. A lot of people want God while still holding on to mindsets, habits, and influences of the world around them. And it's not supposed to be like that. be in the world, but not of the world. That's what the New Testament says. But these chapters, they constantly show separation between what is holy and what is corrupt. Then when you move, y'all, when you move to chapter 23, the practical laws about justice, honesty, and worship come along. The law of Moses included straightforward daily requirements that affected every part of their lives. Every part of that law was designed to help Israel act as God's people and worship him through their conduct. Their behavior, it was supposed to separate them from the pagan nations around them. When you see them, you should be able to know that, hey, they're not of the pagan people. God tells them not to spread false reports or follow the crowd into wrongdoing. And that's important because people often assume something is right simply because the majority agrees with it. And that's not true at all. But truth isn't determined by popularity. The truth has no feeling. That's my saying, y'all. The truth does not have a feeling. The truth is just the truth. God also warns against showing partiality or twisting justice for personal gain. And justice was supposed to be honest and balanced, not one scale above the other one. One overlooked detail is that God even commands them to help their enemies' animals if they see them struggling or under a burden. And think about that for a moment. Let's think about that, y'all. What was God teaching them? God was teaching them not to allow hatred, pride, or bitterness to override righteousness. That's what he was teaching them. And the chapter also discussed the Sabbath laws. Not only was every seventh day considered holy, but every seventh year was as well. The Sabbath laws, they required both the seventh day and the seventh year to be treated as sacred opportunities to rest, to trust and rejoice in God's provision, to trust that he will provide for them still, even if they took a day off, y'all. That taught Israel mercy and dependence on God. Now, rest required faith because Israel had to trust that God would still provide for them when they stopped striving and working constantly. I think I just explained that twice, but it's okay. God established animal festivals to celebrate him because the Israelites, they struggle with idolatry. God required them to intentionally come together to worship, rejoice, and honor him regularly. They weren't supposed to appear before God empty-handed, y'all. Not one person. They were to bring sacrifices that demonstrated gratitude, loyalty, love, and remembrance of what God had done for them. Remembrance. Then God said something powerful to them. He tells them that he is sending an angel before them to guide them, protect them, and bring them into a place he prepared for them. This angel will go before them as a guide, protector, and a deliverer. So if you think about it, the Israelites, they had it made. All they had to do was just follow the laws. God was already making a way before they even stepped into the land. Their responsibility was obedience while God handled the outcomes of whatever would have arose. But God also warns them not to rebel against him because disobedience wouldn't be taken lightly, y'all. And that section reveals something important as well. Obedience, it activated divine protection, guidance, and warfare on Israel's behalf. That's all they had to do was follow the laws and praise and worship God. God even told them that he would be an enemy to their enemy and an adversary to their adversaries. Before many of the other nations, they started, y'all, God was already promising victory if they remained obedient to him. But God also makes it clear that there was to be no compromise with the nations around them or their false gods. And one of the biggest takeaways from chapter 3, one of the biggest takeaways is that there can't be compromise with sin while trying to walk with God. You can't do that. No type of compromise. We can't do that. Another important lesson is that we should learn to trust God's timing. God doesn't move on our time. He's not a $5 hot and ready. And he told Israel he wouldn't drive all out their enemies at once, but little by little, so everybody could know, hey, Come on now. That matters because people often, they want God to change everything immediately. But sometimes God works progressively instead of instantly. Some victories happen through a process, not like a genie in a bottle. Another takeaway is that environment matters. God repeatedly warned Israel not to adopt the practices of the people around them because eventually, whatever you continue to entertain will begin influencing the way you think, live, and respond. Chapter 23 also shows that obedience unlocks protection, provision, and direction. Then moving on to chapter 24, y'all. It becomes one of the most important covenant moments in Exodus. God calls Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel upward the mountain. Moses tells the people all the words of the Lord, and together the people respond, all that the Lord hath said will we do. They were lying. Moses then writes the book of the covenant. An altar is built along with 12 pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Sacrifices, they were offered before the Lord, and then something significant happened. Blood is sprinkled on the altar, representing God's side of the covenant. And then on the other side, the blood is sprinkled on the people, representing their covenant binding. Now, the covenant, it wasn't just spoken verbally. It was sealed with blood, commitment, and agreement. And that's important throughout the scripture because blood represents covenant, life, and binding agreements. A covenant with God was never meant to be shallow or convenient, and Israel couldn't claim to belong to God while living however they wanted. This moment also points forward to the New Testament when Jesus speaks about the new covenant in his blood. Hallelujah. Then you have Moses, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, yes, and the 70 elders. They go up and they see God, the God of Israel. The description says there was something under his feet like sapphire stones, clear like heaven itself. And then the text says that God did not lay his hand upon them. They saw God ate, drank, and they ate and drank in his presence. That's the feast I was talking about earlier, y'all. Now, moving on, that moment represented fellowship, covenant, and a relationship with God. But even then, not everyone went to the same level. They did not. Moses later goes higher with Joshua while the other ones remains behind. And that's important because not everyone is willing to go as far with God. And you have different levels of obedience that often leads to different levels of intimacy and responsibility with God. Then the glory of God, it covers the mountain, y'all. Okay, let's stop. Then the glory of God covers Mount Sinai with clouds of fire. I said clouds of fire, clouds and fire. To the people below, the glory of God looked like a consuming fire on the top of the mountain. Moses enters into the midst of the cloud and remains there for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, y'all, we about to get into what these Israelites did, y'all. These chapters, they reveal something important about God's nature. God is loving, merciful, patient, and faithful. But he's also holy, just, powerful, and serious about covenant. One of the biggest takeaways from chapter 24 is that covenant requires obedience, relationship, agreement, and commitment. Blood showed the covenant was binding. It's binding. God's presence is holy, but he still invites relationship. And throughout these chapters, God keeps showing Israel that real worship was never supposed to stay inside ceremonies alone. It was supposed to affect their conduct, integrity, relationship, worship, obedience, and the way they lived every single day. Not one day out of the week, not 2 days out of the week, not 4 days out of the week, but every day. And maybe that's the real question that these chapters leave us with. How close do we actually want to get to God? Faith, y'all. Faith. Faith, faith, faith. And that mountain is a picture of many people today. It's a picture of many people today. Some people are satisfied staying at the bottom as long as they can say they are around God. Some want the promises without the process, and some want God's hand, but not his holiness. Because a deeper relationship with God has never been about popularity, talent, or appearance. It's always been about surrender.